A locked door, a vanished guest, a deadly secret. Welcome to Shadow Files. I am your host, Kyle. This community is incredible. Comment below and share where you're listening from. Your words always make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. The night train from Calais to London rattled through the English countryside, its compartments filled with weary travelers seeking sleep. First-class passengers drowsed in plush leather seats, while porters moved quietly along the corridors. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, blurring the hedgerows and villages into streaks of shadow. At precisely 2 minutes past midnight, a scream tore through the first-class carriage. It was brief, sharp, and quickly smothered, yet loud enough to rouse the slumbering. A steward rushed forward, followed by 2 gentlemen who had been playing cards in the lounge. The source was cabin B7. The door was locked. After frantic knocking brought no reply, the steward fetched the guard. Within minutes, the door was forced open. Inside lay Sir Charles Lytton, a man of wealth and notoriety, sprawled on the cabin floor. His evening clothes were in perfect order, but his face was twisted in a mask of terror. The only sound in the room was the steady rattle of the train upon the rails. At first, it seemed natural causes. His heart, perhaps. But on the polished mahogany table by the berth stood a half-finished glass of brandy, its amber surface glinting oddly in the dim light. And beside the glass lay a small leather-bound journal, open to a page where 3 words had been scrawled in a trembling hand: "The silent passenger." What chilled the assembled company further was not the death itself, but the discovery that the compartment's second berth, booked in the name of an unknown gentleman, was entirely empty. The ticket had been purchased, the baggage loaded, yet its supposed occupant was nowhere to be found. The train guard muttered that it was impossible. Passengers could not simply vanish between stations, yet one had. And so, amid whispers of murder, poison, and dark plots, the train thundered towards Victoria Station, bearing not only the lifeless body of Sir Charles, but also the mystery of the silent passenger who never arrived, yet whose presence lingered like a shadow in the room. The guard, a pale fellow with a jutting Adam's apple, was for turning everyone back to their compartments, but curiosity spreads faster than authority on a night train. Faces blossomed in the corridor, hatless, slippered, tense, until the steward lifted his hands in a despairing plea and begged them to stand clear. The forced door hung askew on its lower hinge where the bolt had given. The window was shut. The blind was drawn perfectly straight. The lamp cast a small, civilized pool of light that made the dead man's expression all the more dreadful for its tidiness. A compact gentleman with an extravagant moustache appeared as if conjured by order itself. I wore an immaculate overcoat despite the heat of the carriage, and his hat lay flat against his chest as though it, too, observed the solemnity of death. The guard started, then brightened with sudden recognition. "Monsieur Poirot." "Sir, if you would." "Quietly," said Poirot, a hand raised, the softest of commands. "All will be done with the neatness, yes?" The order. Always the order. His eyes travelled, quick and bright, over Sir Charles Lytton's body. The table, the glass, the small leather journal. He did not cross the threshold yet. His gaze worked first from without, like a draftsman setting his margins. He asked for the key. The guard produced it, embarrassed. "We forced the door, sir. The bolt was on. The key was inside, on the little hook." "Eh bien, and before the forcing, you are certain there was no reply?" The steward answered, "None, sir. We knocked, myself and these gentlemen." He indicated 2 figures hovering near, an elderly, soldierly man with the flushed affront of a colonel at a bad club dinner, and a younger gentleman whose thin face was all quickness and darting glances. Colonel Blount and Mr. Greaves were in the lounge. They heard the scream. "The scream," murmured Poirot, tasting the word. It is always a matter to be precise. Was it of surprise, of pain, of fear? "Monsieur le Colonel, you have the ear of the barracks, perhaps?" Colonel Blount stiffened. Short, sharp. Not a woman's scream. I'd say a man stifling a shout. I was up at once. And you, Monsieur Greaves? Mr. Greaves had clever hands that could not be persuaded to be still. They smoothed his tie, sought his cuff, found nothing to mend. It was odd, sir, the sort of sound one makes when something not expected happens close at hand. Not, I should say, agony. Poirot inclined his head. He stepped in, delicately avoiding the splinters by the door, and moved to the table without brushing his sleeve against the berth. He stooped over the glass without touching it. The brandy's surface had a fine, trembling light, the kind that lingers when a heavy thing is set down near it. His gaze shifted a hair's breadth to the journal. The words, "The Silent Passenger," had been scrawled boldly, yet unevenly. He bent lower and smelled the paper. Then he looked at the pen in the little writing recess. It was the carriage pen, cheap, serviceable, with ink that tended toward a cold blue. He lifted his eyes to the steward. "You served this gentleman tonight?" "At 11:30, sir. Brandy, 2 glasses and a carafe. He told me he expected company." "And yet there is 1 glass," murmured Poirot. "Where is the twin that completed the symmetry? Monsieur, when did you remove it?" "I did not, sir. I have not been back since." "No?" Poirot's brows rose. "Then a glass has the talent of vanishing upon a moving train. It is whimsical." He turned, squinting up at the luggage rack. A neat valise rested there, new enough to retain the crispness in its leather. On its side, a luggage label was painted with a simple monogram, RT. A second label, chalked by a Continental Customs officer, bore a scrawl that might have been Cologne or Calais or nothing at all. Poirot considered, then nodded at the steward. "This was brought on board?" "Yes, for the second berth, sir. The berth was booked. Mr. Adrian North on the ledger. Cash at Calais." "But no Monsieur North," said Poirot. "No companion for the brandy, a berth ghosted by a name and a bag. His silence is eloquent." His finger, hovering, indicated the second berth. The pillow, no crease at the center. Yet regardez, the corner. A mark, slight as from a hand pressing downward. Someone leaned, perhaps, to tie a lace, to listen. Poirot straightened and stood at the window blind. He brought it up an inch, down an inch, then left it precisely where he had found it. The blind is the friend of those who like not to be seen. But to close it so straight, that is another friend entirely, the friend of order. Sir Charles Lytton liked things to be exact, I think. His cuffs, the collar, the hair brushed back after the dozing, and yet... He moved, feather light, to the dead man's hand. The nails are clean, the fingers relaxed. There is not the clutching, the spasm. He was surprised, yes. He was afraid, yes. But he did not fight. The guard cleared his throat. "We shall be at Victoria in 15 minutes, sir. Yardmen will be waiting." "Good," said Poirot. "We shall make for them a little parcel of facts, tied with a straight ribbon. First, a gentleman dead in a locked compartment. Second, a second berth engaged by one who does not appear. Third, a glass of brandy for 2, of which 1 glass is absent. Fourth, a message in a journal. Words written, perhaps, by a hand not accustomed to the instrument." He peered again at the scrawl. "Sir Charles used a gold pen. I see the clip mark at his breast pocket. Where is it?" "Not here." "Why should a man write with another pen in his last moment?" Colonel Blount harumphed. "Dash it all, he wrote it because he was dying. Snatch the first thing, that's what dying men do." "Perhaps," said Poirot, "but consider, a man of habits, of pride in the little proprieties, and the pen that is his, the one that writes with the soft line, eh bien, it vanishes tonight. And the message, what is it? A riddle, a reproach, a warning? We shall not decide now." He looked to the steward. "No one enters this compartment, and nothing is touched. The names of those in the first-class carriage, if you please. And you will be so gentle as to tell the porter who handled the valise of Monsieur North that Hercule Poirot has questions to make of him." The list was forthcoming, scribbled neatly on company paper. Colonel Peregrine Blount, Mr. Lionel Greaves, Mrs. Iris Vale, actress Dr. Émile Fournier of Paris, Miss Celia Hart, a secretary, Mr. Felix Brand, a business associate of Sir Charles, Mrs. Treadgold with maid, a vicar of indeterminate parish. A little society assembled, as if for a drawing-room where the entertainment had turned macabre. The train sighed into Victoria, steam and soft light and the shine of overnight dew on iron. Police waited with faces set to professional gravity. Inspector Sharp, tall, spare, watchful, with the mouth of a man too often disappointed by human nature to show it, took charge. He knew Poirot. Most policemen did, and were not always pleased by it, yet Inspector Sharp had the good grace to be practical. "You're on the spot then, Monsieur Poirot." He lifted his hat a fraction. "And a good thing, too. We'll have the body looked over, the carriage sealed, and the passengers, corralled. You'll lend us your eyes." "They are ever at the service of justice," said Poirot, bowing. "But remember, my friend, it is not the chemical that speaks to me. It is the human heart." He glanced at the gathered passengers as they were shepherded to a quiet lounge off the platform. "There is fatigue, irritation, fear, indifference. These are the colors. The pattern we shall know." They took statements, the bare bones first. Colonel Blount had played whist with Mr. Greaves until close to midnight. "We heard the cry. I led the way," the colonel insisted, as though leadership itself were an alibi. Mr. Greaves elaborated rather more than asked, producing remarks about timings, about the steward's tray, about the exact shade of brandy which, he said, had looked oily. Poirot filed away the choice of word. Mrs. Iris Vale, in a travelling cloak with the careless elegance of a woman whose mirrors are kind, had been in her compartment reading. Her voice drew attention in the way that well-trained voices do. I heard it, yes, a sound, like the last note of a violin cut short. I opened my door. Men ran by. I did not go nearer. I have a horror of such things. She shivered quite beautifully and watched Poirot watch her. Dr. Fournier, a small Frenchman with soft professional hands, had slept badly and took a turn in the corridor 10 minutes before midnight. He had noticed Sir Charles's door, then closed, and the blind drawn. He had not heard the scream, he said. He had dozed again, a poor sleeper despite his trade. Poirot believed at once that he was a poor sleeper and reserved judgment on all else. Miss Celia Hart, pale and precise, had been at work over a notebook, the sort of young woman who would never be caught with an untidy calculation. She had glanced at the clock at midnight precisely, she said, because she was adding columns and liked to know where the day turned. She had heard the noise and, thinking at first it was a porter dropping something heavy, had hesitated before stepping out. "I saw Mr. Brand come from his compartment," she added, with the air of putting a comma in the right place, and Mrs. Vale opened her door after him. Mr. Felix Brand's manner was smooth, his tie a shade too adventurous. He spoke with controlled patience, like a man offended by the bad taste of death intruding upon business. "Sir Charles and I had been in Paris together. We travelled to Calais, parted on the quay, different arrangements. I did not see him again until this. I heard the commotion and came out. I knew Sir Charles slightly. We had dealings." "And your dealings," asked Poirot softly, "were agreeable?" Mr. Brand smiled without showing his teeth. "As agreeable as such arrangements ever are, monsieur." A maid, timid as paper at the flame, swore that she had seen a man in a dark coat standing at the far end of the corridor not long before the scream. "He was very still, sir. I thought him a porter at first, but he did not move. Then I looked away and he was gone." Inspector Sharp made notes. Poirot made impressions. He watched where the eyes went when people spoke of Sir Charles. Some glanced towards the carriage with a morbid pull. Others avoided it entirely as if the sight would stick to them. Miss Hart never lifted her eyes while speaking. Her gaze lived on neat lines of ink. Mrs. Vales moved always to an audience, seeking the attention, the pity, the mirror in other faces. Mr. Greaves's hands played fretfully with a pocket matchbook. Colonel Blount, having given his account, sat squarely, announcing by posture that virtue is a seat one assumes and holds. The porter who had handled the mysterious valise was summoned, a red-eared youth keen to be useful. "The bag, sir." "Brought it aboard at Calais for Mr. Adrian North, first class, B7. A gentleman gave me the chit, tall, soft hat, muffler. Spoke with a foreign sort of English. Said Mr. North was already on the train and to be quick." "Ah," said Poirot, "and you did not see this Mr. North later?" "No, sir, I didn't, sir. I went aft." "And the gentleman with the muffler, he gave a tip, yes? Was it generous?" The boy looked guiltily hopeful. "Very, sir. So one pays more than is customary for the pleasure of being invisible," murmured Poirot. "We will seek him, this generous ghost." Inspector Sharp looked up from his notes. "Locked room," he said, as if the phrase were a personal affront. "And a dead baronet. All London will have it with their breakfast. We'll have the body examined for poison. There's no mark of violence. That message, too. Cryptic stuff. What do you make of it?" Poirot folded his hands. "A man who lives by appearances writes a message that is unlike him, on the wrong paper, with the wrong pen. That, to me, is the thing most like a shout. He tells us something, of haste, perhaps, of compulsion. Or he tells us of a mind that wishes us to think of compulsion. The words themselves, the silent passenger, may point to a man, yes, or they may point to what? Men carry without speaking, fear, remorse, a debt, a disease of the soul." He turned, and the little smile came that was not unkind. "We will listen to who speaks, and we will listen to who is silent. Between the two, mon ami, is truth." They returned briefly to the carriage at Sharp's word. A constable posted to keep idle eyes away. Poirot stood once more just within the door. He altered nothing. He stored everything. The brandy held its small secret. A faint, odd film clung to the inner surface of the glass and broke when he breathed upon it. On the carpet beneath the rack he found, with a patience like prayer, a minute pale thread caught in the seam, almost invisible, but not quite. He showed it to no one. He only made, with his forefinger, a little sign of acceptance in the air. "Inspector," he said at last, "assemble for me, if you please, all who shared this corridor at midnight. We shall make the questions gently, and in a different order. People tell more when they do not know what you wish to hear, and someone here will tell us, by a glance or by the choice of a word, which glass is missing and why." "Which glass?" Sharp frowned. "The one that is not here," said Poirot cheerfully. "It is a very talkative absence." He stepped back into the corridor where the night air from the platform found its way and cooled the heat of too many breaths. "Also, one little thing more. The dead gentleman's gold pen. Find me where it has gone, and you shall be nearer to the man who wished us to read a message written without it." He looked along the line of faces waiting, each governed by a private calculation. Somewhere among them, he thought, conscience had already begun to sweat. He had only to bring the handkerchief. The little lounge off Victoria Station had been transformed into a makeshift chamber of inquiry. The lamps burned low against the grey light of approaching dawn, and the smell of damp woolen coats mingled with the scent of stale tobacco. A few trays of tea and sandwiches, hastily provided, lay mostly untouched on the sideboard. The suspects, though no one called them that yet, sat or stood in various postures of fatigue, impatience, or guarded composure. Hercule Poirot remained very still, the axis around which all the rest seemed to turn. Inspector Sharp, practical man, busied himself with papers. He intended to proceed in the tidy fashion of police routine, but Poirot had already raised a hand. "Permit me, my friend. You will have your statements. That is necessary. But first, let us observe a little play, oui. When people believe themselves to be waiting, they reveal their souls more freely than when they believe themselves to be questioned." Sharp gave a half-grunt, half-laugh, but agreed. He stationed himself discreetly near the door, while Poirot simply stood at the center, hands folded neatly, head inclined, listening. Mrs. Iris Vale, draped in her cloak like a stage curtain, leaned elegantly on the arm of a sofa. She looked around with the air of one accustomed to being seen, her eyes lingering especially on the young Mr. Greaves, who fidgeted visibly under her attention. Colonel Blount sat ramrod straight, his moustache bristling in indignation at the very idea that anyone might question his word. Miss Celia Hart had taken out her notebook and appeared to be making neat columns of figures, though Poirot noticed that no pencil marks followed after the first few lines. Dr. Fournier rubbed his hands together continuously, as though washing them in an invisible basin, and Felix Brand stood by the mantelpiece with the air of a man calculating the cost of lost hours. Poirot's eyes travelled gently from one to another, until Mrs. Vale caught his gaze. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a little tremor of voice perfectly timed, "is it true? That poor Sir Charles. Murdered?" There was a pause, and every face turned toward Poirot. "My dear lady," Poirot replied, "that is not a word one pronounces until one is sure. Yet consider, madame, does a man in the best of health fall dead at midnight with a cry that summons half the carriage? And does such a man, in his last moment, write 3 words so strange, so enigmatic, unless his end comes not by nature, but by design?" A stir ran through the room. Colonel Blount gave a loud "ha!" that might have been agreement or disgust. Miss Hart bent over her notebook, though her hand did not move. Mr. Greaves tapped the table in a nervous tattoo. "Then the Yard will search for poison?" asked Dr. Fournier, almost hopefully. "Yes," said Poirot. "They will search, they will test, they will examine, and perhaps they will find. But me, I search not in the glass, but in the eyes." "Eyes," repeated Mr. Greaves. His own darted like minnows. "Mais oui, the eyes betray what the lips conceal. For instance, when I say that Sir Charles expected company, one of you looks down in confusion. When I mention the missing glass, another stares fixedly at the carpet. And when I speak of poison, then, Monsieur le Docteur, your glance is most professional, but there is something more. You know, perhaps, how subtle a powder, how quick a tincture might work." Dr. Fournier flushed slightly. "I am a physician, monsieur. I think in those terms, naturally." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "But of course, it is your métier." Inspector Sharp interjected, "Let's have order. One by one, if you please. Colonel Blount, you say you were with Mr. Greaves until the scream. Did you see anyone pass the corridor?" "Absolutely not," declared the colonel. "Dash it, man, I'd have noticed. We played 3 rubbers. Greaves here dealt last. The scream came, out we went, both together. There's nothing more." Greaves nodded too eagerly. "Yes, precisely so. We were together. He went first, I followed. It was only a moment later that the steward came. We banged on the door. That's all." Poirot observed their recital with a small smile. "It is very exact, this account. Too exact, perhaps. Monsieur Greaves, you repeat the colonel's words like the echo in the cavern. But echoes, they do not add. They diminish. I think you saw something, but perhaps not what you wished to acknowledge." Greaves's colour rose. "Really, sir, I resent—" Poirot silenced him with a look almost tender. "Resentment, monsieur, is often the brother of concealment. You will forgive me if I keep my thoughts a little while. Continue, Inspector." Mrs. Vale's account was given with gestures as if upon a stage. She described her reading, the sudden interruption, her horror at the thought of blood. Poirot let her finish, then asked, "And yet, madame, you looked out at once. You did not wait to hear the commotion before opening your door?" She hesitated the smallest fraction of a second, then smiled. "Perhaps curiosity overcame fear, Monsieur Poirot." "Curiosity," Poirot murmured, "is the motive of the innocent, but also of the guilty. A curious thing." Félix Brand spoke next, economical in words. He admitted to business dealings with Sir Charles, shares, ventures, matters of finance, but claimed no intimacy. "I scarcely knew the man, Poirot. We happened to travel the same route, nothing more." Poirot lifted a brow. "And yet you knew him enough to speak of business in Paris. Monsieur, you wear a tie of daring pattern, but your manner is most discreet. You do not speak all that you know." Brand's eyes narrowed. "And do you, Monsieur Poirot?" There was a little ripple of amusement in the room, quickly silenced by Poirot's calm reply. "I speak when the time is ripe, as does the fruit." Finally, Miss Celia Hart laid aside her notebook. Her voice was precise, her words clipped. "I was working. I heard the noise. I saw Mr. Brand in the corridor immediately after. I noticed also Mrs. Vale's door opening. I record details. It is my habit. But I can add nothing more." Poirot regarded her keenly. "Mademoiselle, you have the air of one who keeps accounts not only of money but of conduct. You do not forget. Yet sometimes, we forget the very detail that will save us. You say you looked at the clock at midnight precisely. Was it because of your work or because you wished to mark an alibi?" Her lips pressed together. She made no answer. The questioning lapsed into silence. The suspects shifted, coughed, avoided each other's gaze. Poirot walked to the window and stood with his back to them, hands behind his back, rocking gently on his toes. He spoke without turning. "There is one among us who knows where the second glass has gone. There is one among us who knows why the pen of Sir Charles was not used to write his last words. There is one among us who knows what is meant by the silent passenger. Presently, that one will betray themselves. It is inevitable. For the truth, mes amis, is like the spring. The water rises whether one covers it or no." Inspector Sharp gave orders for the passengers to be accommodated at nearby hotels under guard until further inquiries could be made. They rose, stretching, murmuring among themselves. Poirot watched every movement. As Mrs. Vale gathered her cloak, she leaned toward Poirot. "Surely you will discover the truth, monsieur. Such mysteries, so very dreadful." Poirot bowed. "Dreadful, yes, madame. And yet, how very instructive to see the masks men and women wear." When at last the room had emptied, leaving only Poirot and Inspector Sharp, the detective seated himself delicately on the edge of a chair. He brushed a speck of lint from his sleeve. "Well, my friend," said Sharp, "what do you make of it?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That we are presented with too much. A vanished passenger, a locked room, a missing glass, a missing pen, a message that may or may not be genuine. These things, they make confusion, and yet order exists beneath. It is for me to find the pattern. You think the message was forged? I think, Inspector, that Sir Charles Lytton would not, in his last breath, write with another man's pen, in a hand uncharacteristic, a phrase so theatrical. He was a man of appearances, yes, but of dignity. That message, eh bien, it shouts of staging." Sharp frowned. "Then it's the murderer writing it to throw us off." "Just so. But in throwing us off, he reveals himself. For the murderer, like the actor, cannot resist a flourish. And one of our company tonight, one of them loves the flourish." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You observed, perhaps," the inspector thought. "Mrs. Vale? Perhaps, or perhaps another. The flourish is not only of gesture, but of mind." Poirot rose, pulling on his gloves. "Tomorrow I will speak with each again, at leisure, in comfort. And I will ask not what they saw, but what they felt, for it is in the psychology that we find the crack. As they stepped out into the station yard, the sky was paling with a reluctant dawn. London stirred to life, carriages, motor cars, the cry of porters. Yet to Poirot the world seemed hushed, as though the great city itself waited for the resolution of this puzzle. "The silent passenger," he murmured, half to himself, a phrase of poetry in a world of timetables. Very curious. And in his pocket, secret even from the inspector, the tiny pale thread he had found in the carriage lay folded in his handkerchief, a silent clue, waiting its turn to speak. The following morning broke cold and pale, with a thin drizzle washing the streets of London. Hercule Poirot, having allowed himself a modest breakfast, croissants of the proper crispness, coffee taken exactly as he liked, arrived at the hotel where Inspector Sharp had arranged for the passengers of the Calais-London train to be lodged under police observation. The lounge, once grand, now carried the faint smell of damp umbrellas and boiled eggs, but it provided the privacy Poirot required. He began not with an assembly, but with individuals. "One by one, my friend," he had told Sharp. "We speak to them not as suspects. None. That alarms, but as people who, by misfortune, are entangled in a tragedy. In this way, they reveal more than if we come with accusation." The first to be summoned was Colonel Blount. He entered briskly, boots polished though the hour was early, mustache combed to an authority of its own. Poirot greeted him with civility and offered a chair. "Colonel," Poirot began, "forgive that I disturb you at such an hour. Yet precision is everything. Last night you gave us your account of the whist game with Mr. Greaves. You were very exact, too exact, perhaps. Permit me to ask, were you entirely at ease with your companion?" Blount gave a snort. "Dashed irritating fellow, Greaves. Too much talk at the card table. Still, he played a fair hand. I've no quarrel with him." "And with Sir Charles Lytton? You knew him? Met him at the club? Fellow of some notoriety. Money here, money there. Never quite sure where it came from. Always struck me as a man who kept something up his sleeve. But what's that to do with me? I hardly knew him." Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "And yet you rushed at once to his door. You heard the scream, and without hesitation you thought, 'It is Sir Charles?'" Blount hesitated a fraction. "Well, the sound came from that direction, obvious enough. Perhaps. Or perhaps you were already half attentive to that compartment." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Forgive me, Colonel, it is my nature to suspect curiosity even in the most upright of officers." Blount bristled but gave no more, and after a few additional questions he was dismissed. Poirot made a small note in his book, "Blount conceals irritation, manner defensive." Next came Mr. Lionel Greaves, who entered with the quick, bird-like motions of a man perpetually ill at ease. He sat with his hands clasped and began speaking at once, before Poirot had asked a question. "Monsieur Poirot, I assure you I've told everything. The Colonel can vouch for me. We were together all evening, absolutely together. I never left the lounge." Poirot raised a hand. "Calmez-vous, monsieur. It is not an accusation, only a curiosity. Last night you used a word that struck me. You said the brandy looked oily. A very precise observation when others spoke only of its color or taste. Why so?" Greaves swallowed. I have a sensitive eye for such things. I dabble in chemistry, a hobby only. It struck me at once that something had altered the liquor, but of course I cannot say it was poison." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet you said nothing to the others until I asked. That is interesting, is it not?" The man flushed. "I feared to be ridiculous. Imagine accusing brandy of oiliness before a room full of strangers. They would laugh. Or," Poirot said softly, "you feared that by remarking too much you would connect yourself with knowledge of the act. Do not answer. It is only a speculation." Greaves stammered an objection, but Poirot dismissed him gently. In his notes he wrote, "Greaves, over-defensive." observes too closely. Mrs. Iris Vale appeared next, sweeping into the room with an air that made even the weary constable at the door stand straighter. She was beautiful in the manner of women who are quite certain they are observed. Every glance, every turn of her wrist seemed rehearsed. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, "surely you do not suspect a lady of my profession. I am, after all, a creature of the stage, not of crime." "Madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "forgive that I say so, but to be of the stage is to be also of deception. An actress must convince her audience that she is what she is not. Such a talent, eh bien, it is invaluable to the criminal." Her laugh was soft, practiced. "Touché, monsieur. But in truth I know little of Sir Charles. A coarse man with money but no refinement. I avoided him. Yet you opened your door so quickly. Quicker than most. Why?" She tilted her head. "Because, Monsieur Poirot, I have the nerves of an actress. We are attuned to the dramatic. A cry in the night. How could I resist?" Poirot studied her. "And did you see anyone? Anyone who hurried away, perhaps?" A pause, just long enough. Then, number. "No one at all." He dismissed her, noting Vale, poise too perfect, timing too neat. Dr. Fourneau came next, rubbing his hands, still as though they ached with perpetual washing. He explained again his poor sleep, his walk in the corridor, his professional suspicion of poison. Poirot allowed him to speak, then asked quietly, "Doctor, you did not hear the cry, you say? Yet the corridor was near. Others heard. You did not. Why?" Fournier's eyes shifted. "I may have dozed after my walk. Truly, I cannot be sure. You are a man of medicine, doctor. You know how the mind invents alibis for its own peace. Be careful that yours is not too convenient." Poirot made a neat mark in his book. Fournier, hesitant, knowledge of poison. Miss Celia Hart entered with her notebook still in hand, as though it were an extension of her. She answered politely, but with an edge of resistance. "You mark every detail," Poirot said. "It is admirable. But tell me, why did you record that you saw Mr. Brand in the corridor? Was it simply fact, or did you wish it remembered by all?" Her eyes flashed. "It was the truth, monsieur. Truth, yes. But sometimes truth is also defense. If you feared suspicion, you might seek to anchor others before they could speak. Forgive me. I speculate only." She pressed her lips thin. Poirot noted Hart, precise, defensive note of accusation against Brand. Felix Brand arrived last, cool and sleek as ever. He died. Claimed disinterest, business connections, nothing more. Poirot questioned him delicately about the missing glass. "A trifling thing," Brand replied, "perhaps misplaced by the steward." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but trifles are the very stones of which guilt is built. You, monsieur, are not the man to overlook trifles in finance. Why in crime?" Brand smiled thinly. "You have an answer for everything, Poirot." "No, I have questions. The answers, they come from you." When the interviews concluded, Poirot returned to Inspector Sharp, who had listened from behind a screen. "Well," Sharp demanded, "you have them all on edge, but do you know more than last night?" Poirot smoothed his moustache, eyes gleaming. "I know this. Sir Charles was not killed by chance. The scream we heard, it was not his alone. It was the cry of discovery, the sound of a man who sees betrayal in the instant before death. And the words in the journal, they were staged, but staged clumsily. The hand trembled not with poison, but with haste. Someone wished us to believe in mystery, when the truth is of the simplest psychology. Which is that the silent passenger is not a man at all, but an idea, something each of these people carries. Guilt, debt, hatred, fear. One among them has carried it too long. Last night it found its voice." Poirot rose, his eyes bright. "Tonight we will gather them all together. And then, Inspector, the little grey cells will speak." and in the quiet of his pocket the pale thread Poirot had preserved seemed almost to whisper, promising to unravel the tapestry of deception one stitch at a time. The rain continued most of that day, softening the edges of London into a haze of grey. Hercule Poirot, seated in the small parlour of his flat in Whitehall Court, took tea with meticulous exactitude. He stirred one lump of sugar, never two, then straightened the spoon so it lay precisely parallel to the saucer's rim. Order, always order. Yet in his mind, disorder swirled. Sir Charles Lytton, dead in a locked carriage, a missing fellow passenger who had never truly arrived, a message in the wrong hand, a vanished glass, and, above all, the subtle currents of behaviour that betrayed more than any chemical test could. Inspector Sharp arrived punctually, his coat damp, his expression more harried than before. "You've had the night to think, Poirot. Tell me, where do we stand?" Poirot sipped delicately. "We stand, mon ami, upon a little island of facts, surrounded by a great ocean of suppositions. But islands grow. They are built by the lava of truth that emerges from beneath the sea. Come, let us examine again." He ticked them off on his fingers. Fact 1. Sir Charles was found dead in a locked compartment. Fact 2. He expected company. He ordered 2 glasses, yet one is missing. Fact 3. His gold pen is absent, but a message is written with another pen. Fact 4. The berth beside him was booked by a phantom, Mr. Adrian North, with luggage and ticket, yet no man. Fact 5. Each of our companions on the train has reason to conceal something. Voila, that is our island. Sharp frowned. But what killed him? The doctor found no mark. Ah, the cause of death. That is the sea itself, vast and deceptive. Poison, perhaps. Shock, perhaps. Even strangulation may leave little trace if done with art. But I say to you, the precise mechanics are less important than the psychology, for it is the mind of the murderer that betrays itself in the details. Sharp grunted. "So you mean to press them harder tonight?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mais oui, we will call them together. They will sit in one room, and I will speak. It is not interrogation, it is theatre. And in theatre, the guilty cannot help but play their part too well." At 8 that evening, in a private salon of the hotel, the suspects gathered once more. The room was lit by tall lamps that threw shadows long and thin upon the carpet. Poirot sat at the head of the table, Inspector Sharp at his side, silent and watchful. "Mesdames, Messieurs," Poirot began, "I have invited you here not as a policeman, no, that is for the excellent Inspector Sharp, but as one who seeks the order beneath the chaos. We have among us, I believe, the one who brought about the death of Sir Charles Lytton. Yet do not tremble. Tonight I shall not point the finger. Instead, I will ask questions, not of your actions, but of your hearts." They shifted uneasily. Mrs. Vale arranged her cloak as if on stage. Colonel Blount scowled at the suggestion that his heart should be questioned. Mr. Greaves twitched in his seat. Miss Hart clasped her notebook as though it were armor. Dr. Fournier folded his hands. Felix Brand leaned back with a mask of polite disdain. Poirot allowed the silence to linger before continuing. "Consider, if you please, what it is to be a silent passenger. It is not only the one whose berth is empty. Non, it is also the secret each of you carries, silent, unseen. Shall we explore them?" He turned first to Colonel Blount. "You, mon colonel, have the bearing of honor. Yet last night, when I spoke of curiosity, your indignation was too great. Why so? Is it because you had reason to keep half an eye on Sir Charles' door? Perhaps you knew of a debt of honor between you and him." The colonel flushed scarlet. "That's outrageous. I owed the man nothing." "Nothing. Ah, but you feared I might know otherwise. That is telling, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot let it pass, leaving the colonel to stew in his discomfort. Then to Greaves. "Monsieur, you are quick to note details. Too quick. You spoke of brandy looking oily. You have knowledge of chemistry. Did you fear, perhaps, that others would see how readily such an observation came to your lips? A man does not speak of oiliness unless he has looked for it." Greaves stammered. I only remarked what anyone might notice." "No, not anyone. Only one whose eye is trained." Poirot let the words fall like pebbles, then shifted. "To Mrs. Vale. Madame, your timing is always perfect. You open the door before others. You answer before questions are finished. You are an actress. You play to the audience. But in life, the greatest roles are those not acknowledged. What role did you play last night?" Her lips curved, a smile with edges sharp as glass. "Surely only that of the horrified bystander, monsieur. Or perhaps of the stage manager, arranging the scene?" Poirot's voice was mild, yet her eyes flickered with the faintest alarm. To Dr. Fournier. "You, monsieur le docteur, say you did not hear the cry. Strange, when others did. Sleep, you claim. But I think not. You were wakeful, restless. You walked the corridor. You saw the drawn blind. And yet you tell us you returned to sleep. Why conceal what else you saw?" The doctor's hands rubbed together, faster now. "I saw nothing of consequence." "Perhaps. Or perhaps you saw too much." Poirot's gaze moved on. To Miss Hart. "Mademoiselle, you are precise, orderly, exact. At midnight you noted the clock. Why? Because you like precision, yes, but also because you wish to mark yourself in time. An alibi written in the air, and you accuse Mr. Brand quickly. Too quickly. Why, if not to place the shadow elsewhere?" Her chin lifted. "I told only what I saw. Perhaps." And at last, to Felix Brand. "Monsieur, you are a man of business. You speak little, but you calculate much. You admit dealings with Sir Charles, yet you say you knew him slightly. That is not business, it is evasion. Men of money know each other deeply, for their fortunes entwine. You mislead, monsieur." Brand's smile was smooth, but his eyes narrowed. "You weave webs, Poirot, but webs may catch only shadows." Poirot spread his hands. "Sir, we have shadows, we have secrets. But listen well, the truth is not in the secrets themselves, but in how they are guarded. One among you guards too fiercely." He paused, letting the silence gather like thunderclouds. Sir Charles was no innocent lamb. He was a man entangled in affairs of finance, of reputation, of women. Each of you had reason to dislike him, perhaps even to wish him gone. But only one acted. How? By the simplest of means. A drink offered as friendship. A toast, and in the glass, something bitter. He sipped. He felt the fear. He reached for his pen to write. But the pen was gone. Another pen was placed before him, hurriedly, to stage a message. But the hand, it trembled. It betrayed itself. Gasps stirred around the table. Poirot raised a finger. "Do not fear. I accuse no one yet. But mark this. Whoever removed Sir Charles's pen, whoever drank from the vanished glass, whoever knew that the scream was of surprise and not of agony, that one is the guilty." Inspector Sharp leaned forward. "And can you say who that is?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not yet, but soon. Tonight I wished only to see you all together, to let you watch each other, to listen to your silences. Tomorrow, perhaps, the silent passenger will speak." The gathering broke apart uneasily. Mrs. Vale's laughter was a shade too shrill. Greaves whispered frantically to the colonel. Dr. Fournier left with his shoulders hunched. Miss Hart clutched her notebook as if to steady herself. Felix Brand lingered longest, meeting Poirot's gaze without flinching before slipping away. When the room was empty, Sharp muttered, "You've stirred them like ants in a nest. But have you truly learned anything?" Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Mais qui? I have learned that guilt is like perfume, it clings. Tonight it clung most strongly when I spoke of the missing pen. One among them could not hide the unease. Tomorrow, Inspector, I will have the proof. And as they left the salon, Poirot's hand brushed the pocket where the tiny pale thread lay hidden. It was only a fragment, yet in its silence it spoke volumes. The little grey cells had begun to hum, and Poirot knew the pattern would soon emerge. The drizzle had thickened into a steady rain by the following morning, and a grey fog clung low about the city like a veil concealing secrets. Hercule Poirot, dressed immaculately in dove grey with a bowler hat at the proper angle, walked the hotel corridor with Inspector Sharp at his side. The time had come to probe deeper, not with blunt interrogation but with subtle pressure, the psychological nudges that unravel knots far better than force. They began with Mrs. Iris Vale. She received them in her suite, reclining as though for a magazine portrait, her cloak cast dramatically over the arm of a chaise. A cigarette smouldered between her fingers, its smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "do forgive the disarray. An actress requires her rest. Last night's performance was a trying one, though not on any stage." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your presence alone is a stage. But I must ask, how well did you know Sir Charles?" Her laugh rang clear. "Hardly at all. A boor, a man of appetite, not of refinement. He wished me to dine with him in Paris, and I refused. That is all? Yet he reserved a berth for another, a mysterious passenger. Might that have been you?" Poirot's eyes were keen. She exhaled smoke with perfect control. "Me? Oh no, I should never travel under another's name. It is the fate of actresses to be recognized everywhere, whether one wishes it or not. No, Monsieur Poirot, my only desire was to reach London in peace." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet you opened your door at the cry quicker than the rest. Quicker, perhaps, than a woman horrified would do." She smiled thinly. "An actress, monsieur, listens for cues. A cry in the night, it was instinct to react." Poirot bowed, but in his notebook later he wrote, "Vale, denies intimacy with Sir Charles, but too careful in denial. Door opened unnaturally soon." Next they saw Dr. Fournier. He looked haggard, his eyes bruised by sleeplessness. He gestured them into his room where medical books littered the table in untidy stacks. "You press me again, monsieur," he said, his accent soft, "but I assure you I saw nothing. I walked, I returned, I slept." Poirot seated himself delicately. "Doctor, a physician notices details others miss. When you passed Sir Charles's door, the blind was drawn. Did you not also notice the sound within? Two voices, perhaps?" Fournier's hands rubbed together unconsciously. "I heard something, a murmur. But I thought it only the man speaking to himself. I did not wish to intrude." "Ah," said Poirot gently, "but you did not mention this before. Why conceal it?" The doctor's shoulders sagged. "Because it might mean nothing. And I do not wish suspicion. I'm a foreigner here, monsieur. It is not easy." Poirot studied him a moment. "You fear suspicion too much. That alone is suspicious." He let the silence hang. The doctor shifted uneasily. Poirot's note that Fournier admits voices, conceals knowledge, anxiety high. Lionel Greaves was next, summoned to a quiet parlor. He entered nervously, clutching a matchbook which he flicked open and shut with restless fingers. "Monsieur Poirot," he began breathlessly, "I hope you do not suspect me. I've told you everything. The colonel can vouch for me." Poirot raised a hand. "Be calm, monsieur. Yet you know something, perhaps not of the act itself, but of Sir Charles. Did he threaten you?" Greaves blanched. "No, well, yes, in a manner of speaking. He invested in a company I represented. He accused me of mismanaging funds. But it was nothing criminal, I assure you. Only misfortune. Poirot's eyes gleamed. So he had cause to confront you. Would he not? A man who loses money does not forgive lightly. Greaves licked his lips. But I swear, I never entered his compartment. Poirot leaned closer. Yet you spoke of the brandy, of its oiliness. You knew it was not right. How? I can't explain. I dabble in experiments, chemistry. It's only a hobby. That is all. Poirot's voice softened. Monsieur, hobbies often reveal more than professions. Consider that. Later, in his notes, Greaves. Financial motive. Chemical knowledge. Defensive. Colonel Blount came with the stiffness of a parade ground. He stood, refusing a chair. Well, Poirot, he declared, I trust you're not about to insinuate that a British officer of my standing had anything to do with this ghastly affair. Poirot regarded him steadily. Colonel, honor is a fine armor, but sometimes it hides the bruise beneath. Tell me, you played cards with Greaves. Did you win or lose? The colonel flushed. Dash it all, man. I lost a few pounds. Nothing serious. But Sir Charles, did he not also play cards with you at your club, perhaps? The colonel's eyes narrowed. What of it? Was it perhaps more than a few pounds you lost to him? Enough to bear a grudge? Blount's mustache bristled. Rubbish. If I lost, I paid. That's the code of a gentleman. Poirot said gently, and yet gentlemen sometimes lose more than money. Dignity, pride, even reputation. Would you kill to preserve those? Blount drew himself up. You go too far, Poirot. He stalked out, leaving Poirot murmuring, always the soldier, yet fear is a powerful general. Blount, defensive, pride wounded, possible gambling losses with Sir Charles. Miss Celia Hart was different. She entered composed, her notebook still at hand, and sat quietly awaiting his questions. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, precision is your virtue. But precision may also be armor. Why did you note the time so exactly at midnight? She met his gaze. Because I like to know where I am in my work, and because it mattered. I feared later I might be accused, so I fixed the moment. Poirot nodded slowly. So you anticipated accusation. Why? Her lips pressed together. Because I was near Sir Charles earlier. He spoke to me in Paris. He asked questions about Mr. Brand's business. I did not wish to be mixed up in it. Poirot's brows rose. So Sir Charles pried into Brand's affairs. Interesting. And what did you answer him? Nothing. I ignored him. Her voice trembled slightly. I dislike men like that. Poirot regarded her gravely. Sometimes dislike becomes fear, and fear, mademoiselle, can drive one to desperate measures. His notes hard. Connection between Sir Charles and Brand revealed. Possible knowledge of Brand's dealings. Fearful. Finally, Felix Brand. He entered with smooth composure, seating himself with the air of a man accustomed to boardrooms. Monsieur Poirot, he said, you have cast suspicion widely. But surely, you see, the matter is straightforward. Sir Charles had many enemies. Why fix upon me? Poirot's mustache bristled. Because, monsieur, Sir Charles spoke of business with you, because Miss Hart confirms he asked her of your dealings, because you minimize your connection, and because you are too calm. Innocence is rarely so composed. Brand smiled thinly. A man must be calm in business, Poirot. Panic profits no one. Perhaps. But murder, monsieur. Murder is not business. And you know more than you admit. Tell me, where were you precisely when the cry came? In my compartment, preparing for sleep. I stepped out when I heard the noise. And the missing glass? Poirot asked softly. Brand's eyes flickered, just for an instant. I cannot say. Perhaps the steward misplaced it. Poirot's little smile deepened. Perhaps, or perhaps you drank from it. Brand rose. "If you accuse me, say so outright." Poirot spread his hands. "Accuse? Non, I only observe." When Brand had gone, Poirot turned to Sharp. "You saw, Inspector?" "When I mentioned the glass." His calm cracked. "Only a fraction, but enough. He fears that glass." Sharp frowned. "Then Brand's our man." Poirot wagged a finger. "Patience. He's a man of interest, certainly. But guilt must be proved, not assumed. And others have reasons also. Vale hides her swiftness, Fournier his hearing of voices, Greaves his chemical eye, Blount his pride, Hart her fear. Each could be the silent passenger." He stood, smoothing his jacket. "But one clue speaks louder. The thread, Inspector, the pale thread I found in Sir Charles' compartment. It does not belong to his attire. It is of delicate weave, like that of a woman's garment. When we find to whom it belongs, we will hear the silent passenger at last." Poirot looked out at the rain-slicked street, where carriages splashed and London hurried, oblivious. The murderer believes himself safe within the crowd, but order will prevail, always, always order. The following evening found Hercule Poirot once more in the hotel's private salon, though this time the atmosphere was different. The guests, no longer passengers, but figures caught within the tightening circle of suspicion, entered one by one under the watchful eye of Inspector Sharp. There was a hush about the gathering, as if the rain that tapped the windows had entered with them and subdued every voice. A single lamp illuminated the table around which they sat, and the faint hiss of the gas made the silence seem even more pronounced. Poirot, immaculate as always, stood at the head. His small frame seemed to command the room, his mustaches gleaming like twin sabers in the light. He began without preamble. "Mesdames, Messieurs, each of you carries in your breast a secret. For some, it is small and harmless. For others, it is a heavy stone. But one of you carries the heaviest secret of all: the knowledge of how Sir Charles Lytton died in the locked compartment of the night train. Tonight, perhaps, we may see that secret tremble in the open air." He let his gaze drift slowly across them. Colonel Blount, stiff as a sentinel, Lionel Greaves, pale and twitching, Iris Vale, poised as if on stage, Dr. Fournier, rubbing his fingers like a penitent monk, Miss Hart, notebook unopened but clenched in her hand, Felix Brand, lounging with the studied ease of a man determined not to betray unease. Poirot began his little dance, as he called it to himself, the careful pressing of psychological levers. He turned first to Mrs. Vale. "Madame, you opened your door the instant the cry sounded. You are quick, too quick. Why? Was it because you expected that cry?" She gave a laugh, but there was a sharp edge to it. "Monsieur Poirot, you make drama where there is none." That was curious, no more. Curious, yes, but curiosity does not move the feet before the mind. You were ready, madame, ready for the moment. That is what interests me. She flicked ash into a tray, her hand steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. Poirot turned smoothly away, leaving the bob to settle. He addressed the colonel. "You, mon colonel, you speak much of honor, yet when I mentioned the possibility of gambling losses, you grew angry. Anger, it is often the cloak for truth. Tell me, did you lose to Sir Charles?" Blount colored. "Confound it, man, I told you. Yes, I lost, but I paid my debts. That's the end of it." Poirot inclined his head gently. "Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is not. For some men, to lose before others is more painful than to lose the money. Pride, it cuts deeper than the sword, and men have killed for pride." The colonel slammed a fist on the table. "Are you accusing me?" "No, I'm observing you," Poirot replied mildly. "And your observations, they reveal more than you imagine." He shifted his attention to Greaves, who had begun tapping nervously against the arm of his chair. "Monsieur Greaves, you are a man of chemistry, so you told us. You remarked on the brandy's unusual appearance, yet you claim to have said nothing until asked. Why not cry out at once? Why not warn the others? Greaves' voice trembled. Because I wasn't sure. I thought perhaps my eyes deceived me. If I had spoken and been wrong, I should have been a fool. Poirot's voice dropped, silky and low. And if you had spoken and been right, you would have betrayed yourself. Which was it, monsieur? Greaves could not answer. He stared at the carpet. Poirot let the silence speak. Then to Dr. Fournier. Doctor, you say you walked the corridor before midnight. You admit now you heard voices in Sir Charles's cabin. That is important. 2 voices, Sir Charles and whom? Fournier shook his head miserably. I could not tell. I only heard the murmur. But it was 2 voices, yes. Poirot lifted a finger. Then we know this. Sir Charles did not drink alone. There was a guest. Perhaps the guest who never boarded. The silent passenger. And perhaps, Doctor, you fear to admit whom you glimpsed. But be warned. Silence is also a betrayal. Fournier's face tightened, but he said no more. Poirot's eyes fell upon Miss Hart. Mademoiselle, you are precise. You fix the time, you fix the scene. But you were spoken to by Sir Charles in Paris. He asked you of Mr. Braun. That troubles you still, I think. Why? Because you know something of Mr. Brand that is dangerous. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing. Poirot turned last to Felix Brand. The businessman's composure was a fortress, but Poirot knew that even fortresses have cracks. Monsieur Brand, Poirot said softly, when I asked about the missing glass, your calm faltered. For one instant, you feared. You have reason to fear that glass, do you not? Brand gave a cool smile. You see fear where none exists. You imagine cracks in stone. A glass is missing, yes, but what of it? A careless steward, a broken piece removed. Trifles. Non, monsieur. The missing glass is the most eloquent witness of all. It is absent because someone wished it absent. It is absent because it spoke too clearly of 2 who drank, not 1. 1 glass remains, the other vanished. And in that vanished glass lies the key to Sir Charles's death. Poirot let his words hang. No one moved. The tension in the room was a taut string ready to snap. Then, slowly, he spoke again. You see, mes amis, murder is not only the act of a hand, it is the act of a mind. The guilty mind cannot sit quietly. It must adjust, defend, deny, explain. Tonight I have pressed upon each of you, and each has revealed a little. But one among you revealed too much. One among you betrayed the silent passenger. They shifted uneasily. Mrs. Vale drew her cloak closer. Greaves wiped his brow. The colonel muttered beneath his breath. Dr. Fournier rubbed his hands. Miss Hart's pencil scratched a furious line across her blank page. Brand only smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed the strain. Poirot, satisfied, rose. Tomorrow we shall speak again, and I shall show you the truth. For tonight, let the guilty rest little. Their conscience will not permit it. Later, alone with Inspector Sharp, Poirot reviewed what he had gathered. He took from his pocket the small thread, laying it delicately on a sheet of paper. You see, mon ami, he said, this is no ordinary thread. It is pale, fine, delicate. A woman's garment, perhaps, not Sir Charles's. Not a soldier's, not a businessman's. It comes from the attire of one who moves with grace. Sharp frowned. Mrs. Vale, then. Her cloak? Poirot shook his head. No, her cloak is velvet. This is of silk, finer still. Perhaps from the hem of a dress or from a sleeve. It clung in the carriage, a whisper of presence. And Miss Hart? Poirot tapped his temple. Her garments are simple, modest, woolen. Not this. No, Inspector. It belongs to one who values style, elegance. I begin to see the figure in outline. He sat back, fingers steepled. Sir Charles entertained a guest. That guest drank brandy, left hurriedly, leaving behind this thread. To stage the scene, the pen was changed, the words scrawled, but haste betrayed them, and the glass, it vanished, carried away by the murderer. Sharp leaned forward. "So you know who it is?" Poirot smiled. "I know enough to bring them together again. Tomorrow the little grey cells will speak fully. The murderer cannot remain silent much longer." He rose, adjusting his cuffs, eyes gleaming. "The silent passenger will be silent no more." And with that, Poirot extinguished the lamp, leaving the pale thread on the paper, like a ghostly clue pointing the way to the truth. The morning dawned sharp and brittle, as though the rain-washed city had awakened with renewed suspicion of itself. Londoners bustled in their overcoats and umbrellas, but inside the quiet salon of the hotel, Hercule Poirot prepared for what he thought of as le petit théâtre de la vérité, the little theatre of truth. Inspector Sharp had gathered the passengers once more. The chairs had been arranged in a half-circle before Poirot's chosen place at the hearth. The fire had been kindled not for warmth, but for the symbolism of illumination. Each face was lit, each shadow cast behind, as if the very room conspired with Poirot to reveal the guilty. The suspects entered reluctantly, subdued by the cumulative weight of sleepless nights and the slow tightening of Poirot's questions. Colonel Blount strode in first, posture unyielding but mustache ragged, betraying a restless morning. Greaves followed, looking pale and damp, as if perspiration had soaked through his very bones. Iris Vale swept in with her usual poise, but the circles beneath her eyes spoke of strain. Dr. Fournier carried his weariness like a burden strapped to his back, and Miss Hart clutched her notebook so tightly the leather creaked. Felix Brand arrived last, impeccable as ever, his tie knotted just so, his expression one of cool disdain. Poirot allowed them to settle before speaking. He folded his hands neatly upon his lap. "Mesdames, Messieurs, once more I beg your patience. I assure you the end is near. You are weary, you are suspicious, you are afraid. But the truth, she waits just beyond our grasp. And today, perhaps, we shall close the hand upon her." He leaned forward slightly. "Let us consider again the scene on the train. Sir Charles Lytton was found dead, a locked door, a drawn blind. A journal open, a message scrawled, the silent passenger. A glass of brandy unfinished, a second glass, vanished, a pen missing, and one berth, booked by a ghost. Voila the stage. But what of the actors?" He turned to Inspector Sharp. "Permit me to recount, as an exercise in memory, what each has revealed." Sharp nodded, notebook ready. "Colonel Blount, man of honor, man of pride. He loses money at cards, perhaps to Sir Charles, perhaps to others. He bristles at the suggestion, for to lose is to be dishonored. Yet his alibi is bound tightly to Mr. Greaves, too tightly, as though both cling to the same rope above a pit." The colonel gave a sharp harumph, but Poirot went on. "Mr. Lionel Greaves, he notices the brandy. He says it looks oily. Such an observation is not for the casual drinker. It is for the eye that knows or suspects. He confesses to chemical experiments. He has also quarrelled with Sir Charles over money. Voila, a motive and an ability." Greaves twitched but remained silent, his lips pressed tight. Mrs. Iris Vale, ah, la belle dame, an actress of talent, too quick to open her door, too smooth in her answers. She admits Sir Charles pursued her. She dismisses him with disdain, but disdain, mes amis, may be the mask of fear or of hatred. And she, who plays roles so easily, could also arrange the little theatre of his death. Mrs. Vale lifted her chin. "Monsieur Poirot, I assure you." He raised a hand gently. "Later, madame. Later." "Dr. Fournier." He paces. He rubs his hands. He speaks of poisons with too much familiarity. He admits to hearing voices, though he first concealed it. Why conceal? Because to admit hearing is to admit knowing a guest was present. And knowledge unspoken, mes amis, is often as dangerous as action. The doctor's lips moved, but no words emerged. Miss Celia Hart. Precise. Correct, but too precise. She records the clock at midnight. She places herself firmly in time, an alibi of the mind, written as carefully as her sums. Sir Charles spoke to her of Mr. Brand's affairs. She feared his questions. Fear is a strong motive, no? Miss Hart looked down at her notebook, her knuckles white around it. And at last, Monsieur Felix Brand. He, the calm one, the man of commerce. He admits business with Sir Charles, but downplays it. He fears nothing, or so he would have us believe. Yet when I spoke of the missing glass, his composure cracked. Only for a second, but for Hercule Poirot, a second is enough. Poirot allowed silence to settle. The fire hissed. Each suspect shifted uneasily, as though the chair beneath them grew hot. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And now, mes amis, we come to the matter of the silent passenger. Who is he? A ghost who booked a berth, a man who never boarded? Or is he here, among us still, concealed in another form? His gaze swept them. No. The silent passenger is not a man of flesh, but a symbol. He is guilt, carried quietly by one of you. But guilt leaves traces, toujours. On the train I found such a trace. A pale thread, fine as silk, caught upon the upholstery. It was not Sir Charles's. It was not the Colonel's, or Mr. Greaves's, or the doctor's. It was of a garment finer, more delicate. All eyes turned instinctively to Mrs. Vale. She laughed, a little too sharply. Silk, monsieur? Surely you're mistaken. I wore velvet. Just so, Poirot replied softly. You wore velvet, and Miss Hart wore wool. Then whose garment yielded this silk? Consider carefully, mes amis. Consider what was worn and what was concealed beneath. Poirot paused, letting the suggestion hover like a wasp in the air. The silent passenger left that fragment in his haste. He or she drank from the missing glass. He or she took the pen, scrawled the message, staged the scene, and in their haste they forgot that even silk betrays. The group shifted uneasily. Colonel Blount muttered about foreign tricks. Greaves dabbed his forehead. Miss Hart bit her lip. Mrs. Vale remained motionless. Only Felix Brand's expression hardened ever so slightly, the faintest narrowing of his eyes. Poirot saw it and filed it away. Tomorrow, mes amis, I will ask you all once more to gather, and then I will tie the ribbon upon the parcel. Tonight I've shown you the picture in outline. Tomorrow I shall paint the colors. The truth, she comes. She comes very near. When at last the suspects were dismissed, Inspector Sharp turned to Poirot in frustration. You dangle the rope before them, Poirot, but you don't pull. Why not accuse the one you suspect? Poirot smiled serenely. Because, mon ami, accusation is not enough. I must not only know, I must prove. To accuse without proof is to strike without a blade. Tonight I let them feel the weight of suspicion, each in turn. Tomorrow the guilty will betray themselves. Sharp frowned. And you think they'll crack? Poirot adjusted his cufflinks. It is human nature. Already Monsieur Brand betrays fear of the missing glass. Already Madame Vale denies silk too eagerly. Already the doctor's hands confess more than his words. They are like dancers circling the truth. Soon one will stumble, and when they do, the pattern will reveal itself. He touched the small folded paper in his pocket, where the silk thread rested. This little clue is not enough alone, but joined with psychology, with contradictions, with silence, it will speak, and Hercule Poirot will listen. As the inspector gathered his papers, Poirot stood at the hearth, staring into the flames. The silent passenger, he murmured. He is guilt, and guilt always travels with us, unbidden. One among them will not endure the journey much longer. And with that, he extinguished the lamp, leaving the room in darkness save for the faint glow of the fire, where shadows flickered like ghosts across the walls. The stage was set. The curtain was ready to rise on truth. The rain had given way to a bleak and colourless morning. London, grey and weary, seemed to hold its breath as if the city itself waited for the resolution of a drama, played out not in theatres, but in the closed circle of a railway carriage. In the salon of the hotel, Hercule Poirot had once more assembled the company. This time there was no pretense of routine questioning. Everyone knew the moment approached when suspicion would crystallize into accusation. Inspector Sharp stood near the door, stiff and unsmiling, ready to restrain whomever Poirot's finger might select. The suspects sat as though in court. Colonel Blount, restless, tugged at his moustache. Greaves shifted in his seat, eyes darting, matchbook clenched in trembling hands. Mrs. Vale reclined with a defiance that was almost bravado, her lips curved but her knuckles white. Dr. Fournier leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, rubbing compulsively. Miss Hart sat with her notebook on her knees, but had not written a word since they entered. Felix Brand lounged with deliberate ease, as if by sheer will he might appear untouched by the storm gathering around him. Poirot rose. His manner was not theatrical, yet the quiet command of his presence filled the room more than any stage could. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began, "you have borne with me patiently, and I thank you, but at last we approach the end. Last night I told you the outline. Today I paint in the details, and when the picture is complete, there will be no mistaking the guilty face within it." He took a few steps, hands clasped behind his back. "Consider first the scene of death. Sir Charles Lytton lies in his berth, the door bolted from within. To the casual eye, a locked room mystery, n'est-ce pas? But locked rooms do not trouble Poirot. The door is forced, yes, but before it was forced, there was already a man inside who had means to leave. How? By remaining." They stared at him, startled. Poirot continued smoothly. "Yes, my friends. The silent passenger did not vanish between stations. He remained hidden, silent, until the moment was ripe. Remember, the berth was booked for a Mr. Adrian North. A valise was placed, a ticket purchased, yet no man appeared to claim it. Was that not strange? And yet, it was claimed. It was claimed by one already with us, who travelled under his own name and another. 2 identities, 1 body. Gasps stirred around the room. Poirot's moustache bristled as he went on. Then the brandy. 2 glasses were poured, 1 for Sir Charles, 1 for his guest, but when death came, only 1 glass remained. Why? Because the guest removed his own, fearing it might betray him, and in his haste he overlooked that the absence would speak louder than presence. Always it is so. The detail forgotten, the trifle despised, it is that which convicts. He moved toward the table where Inspector Sharp had placed the evidence. The leather journal, the pen from the carriage, the brandy glass. Poirot lifted the journal with delicate fingers. The message, the silent passenger. Written in a hand unlike Sir Charles's, with a pen not his own. A message intended to mislead, to stage a little drama. Who would do such a thing? Not Sir Charles, a man of dignity, of pride. No, this is the work of an actor in crime, one who cannot resist the flourish. The pen of Sir Charles was stolen to prevent us comparing hands. In its place, the cheap carriage pen was used. This staging, it betrays impatience, vanity, a wish to play the author of tragedy. It betrays the murderer. His eyes swept the room. And then the thread, a pale thread of silk caught in the upholstery of the second berth. Who leaves behind such a trace? Not the Colonel, with his rough serge. Not Mr. Greaves, shabby and worsted. Not the good doctor, whose cuffs are linen. Not Miss Hart, modest in wool, but one who wears garments of delicacy, of fineness, one who values style. Mrs. Vale shifted, lips parting to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. "Non, madame, you wore velvet. Velvet does not fray and so fine. A thread. But there is another whose garments are of silk, though concealed beneath. Monsieur Felix Brand, your cravat of yesterday, silk of the palest grey. I observed it with the eyes of order. From such a cravat, a thread may be pulled, unnoticeable to its owner, but fatal when it clings where it should not. That thread, monsieur, was your silent witness." The room erupted in murmurs. Brand's composure tightened, but he remained silent. Poirot pressed on. "Now let us tie the ribbon, oui?" Motive. Sir Charles Lytton, financier, speculator, gambler in enterprises, travelled with secrets. He had begun to probe into the dealings of one Felix Brand. He had spoken even to Miss Hart of these suspicions. He intended, perhaps, to expose, to ruin. For Monsieur Brand, this was intolerable. His fortune, his name, his liberty, they hung by a thread, and so he resolved upon murder. Brand's lips curved in a cold smile. "You weave a pretty story, Poirot, but stories are not proofs." Poirot bowed slightly. "Proof? I give you proof. First, the false identity. The berth of Adrian North was booked, the valise deposited by a messenger at Calais. Who could arrange such a device but a man practiced in deception, with resources, with boldness? That man is you. Second, the missing glass. Who else but you would have cause to conceal it? For you alone shared the drink with Sir Charles. Third, the pen. Who would steal the fine pen from Sir Charles's pocket, lest his final words be recognized as a forgery? Again, you. And last, the thread. The silk thread, monsieur, is yours. The little grey cells are satisfied." Inspector Sharp moved forward, but Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, my friend. One more turn of the screw. Monsieur Brand, you are a clever man. You staged a locked room mystery, thinking to confuse us. But you forgot the essence of psychology. When I spoke of the missing glass 2 nights ago, your mask slipped. Only for a moment, but I saw the fear in your eyes. And today, when I name the silk thread, your silence is eloquence itself. The guilty need not shout. They cannot speak." The silence in the room was profound. Mrs. Vale's hand trembled as she lit another cigarette. Greaves whispered, I knew it all along." The colonel muttered about honor and dashed foreigners. Miss Hart looked down at her notebook, tears brimming in her eyes. At last, Brand spoke, his voice low and even. "Suppose, Monsieur Poirot, that I deny it, that I say your thread is coincidence, your psychology mere fancy?" Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Then, monsieur, you deny to Inspector Sharp. He will test the glass, he will trace the valise, he will prove what I have already seen. But in your heart, you know, vous êtes pris. You are caught." Brand rose, his composure cracking at last. For one instant he seemed about to lunge for the door, but Sharp stepped swiftly forward, hand upon his arm. The fight went out of him like air, from a pierced balloon. He sank back, face ashen, the mask gone. Poirot regarded him almost with pity. "It is finished, monsieur. You killed Sir Charles because he knew too much of your affairs. You staged a drama to confuse us, but it is always so. The murderer thinks of the grand deception and forgets the tiny detail. The missing pen, the missing glass, the silken thread, they betray you." He turned to the others. "Thus ends the journey of the silent passenger. Not a ghost, not a phantom, but guilt, seated all along in our midst." Inspector Sharp gave the order. Brand was taken, silent and rigid, from the room. The door closed. The others sat stunned, scarcely believing the curtain had at last fallen. Poirot smoothed his cuffs, adjusted his tie, and allowed himself a small sigh. It is curious, is it not? A man kills to silence another, yet it is his own silence that condemns him. Toujours, the psychology triumphs over the mechanics. The little grey cells, they arrange, they order, they reveal. He glanced at the fire, where the last embers glowed. And now, mes amis, the matter is finished. Hercule Poirot will take his chocolate and sleep well. The case of the silent passenger was closed, but in the minds of all who had witnessed his method, the brilliance of Poirot's deduction would not soon be forgotten. The salon was quiet long after Felix Brand had been led away by Inspector Sharp and his men. The silence that remained was not one of suspense, but of release, like the last faint echo after a storm has passed. The others sat in their chairs, diminished figures now that the shadow of suspicion had lifted from them. Colonel Blount mopped his brow with an oversized handkerchief. Greaves stared vacantly at his ever-present matchbook. Miss Hart dabbed her eyes, her relief sincere. Dr. Fournier murmured to himself in French as though offering a prayer. Mrs. Vale, ever dramatic, exhaled a long plume of smoke that curled upward and dissolved in the dim air, her expression equal parts weariness and wounded pride. Poirot remained standing. His posture was as impeccable as when the affair began, yet his voice was softened with something almost like gentleness. Mesdames, messieurs, your ordeal is finished. The truth has been told, the guilty unmasked. It is often so in life that we are forced to walk beside suspicion until it reveals its true face. I thank you for your patience, though it was not easy. Mrs. Vale broke the silence. Monsieur Poirot, to think that all along we shared a carriage with a murderer, and that he wore his mask so well. Poirot inclined his head. It is always thus, madame. The murderer is rarely the man who trembles or rages openly. No, the guilty learn to disguise themselves, but even the most perfect disguise cannot endure forever. A silk thread, a vanished glass, the wrong pen, these trifles are enough when the mind arranges them with order. Greaves's nervous laugh cracked the air dot. And I thought you meant me half the time. I'll never look at a glass of brandy again without wondering what lurks in it. Poirot's moustache twitched. Then the lesson, monsieur, is of use. One must learn not only to look, but to see. There is a difference. Miss Hart rose, clutching her notebook. Monsieur Poirot, if I may, you said Sir Charles spoke to me in Paris, that he questioned me about Mr. Brand. I thought I was in danger. I see now it was not my life he sought, but his reputation. You have freed me of that fear. Merci. Poirot bowed with courtly grace. It is for truth, mademoiselle, that we live. Fear is but the shadow cast by ignorance. When truth comes, the shadow disperses. Inspector Sharp returned, his expression firm but satisfied. Brand has confessed enough to hold him until the rest can be proven. The missing glass was in his case, wrapped in a handkerchief. Poison residue plain as day. You were right about the thread, Poirot. It matches his cravat. And the valise, too, links back to him. The Yard will have no trouble with the rest. Poirot allowed himself the faintest smile. It is always agreeable when Scotland Yard and Hercule Poirot walk hand in hand, n'est-ce pas? Sharp gave a dry chuckle. Hand in hand may be stretching it, but I'll not deny you've done the Yard a service. The press will call it a locked room mystery cracked wide open. They'll print your name in bold again. Poirot smoothed his cuffs. Ah, but I do not seek the bold type, my friend. It is sufficient that justice has order. He turned once more to the assembly. Sir Charles Lytton was not a saint. He made enemies. He pursued fortunes too recklessly. Yet even the reckless deserve justice. His death was a puzzle, and puzzles, they are to be solved. That is the duty of Hercule Poirot. The fire had sunk to embers. Poirot reached for his hat and gloves, preparing to leave. As he did, he cast one last look at the company. You see, mes amis, it is not the fingerprint, the footprint, the cigar ash that matters most. Non, it is the heart, the mind, the little contradictions. The human soul, she cannot help but betray herself. That is the true evidence, always. He bowed, perfectly precise. Now I bid you adieu. The train has reached its station. The journey is done. The silent passenger has been unmasked, and he travels no more. With that, Poirot departed, his small figure receding through the doorway with impeccable dignity, leaving behind not only a room relieved of suspicion, but also the lingering impression that order, however briefly disturbed, had been restored once more. And as Inspector Sharp watched him go, he shook his head with reluctant admiration. "By heaven," he muttered, "there really is no one like him." Poirot, stepping into the brisk London air, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Non, mon ami," he murmured to himself. "There is only Hercule Poirot.